while you have been going about your business, going on the daily operations of your ESD, Safety's Legislative Counsel to my right here, John Carlton, has been hip deep. That's what they said in the, I don't know.
Hip deep?
Hip deep in the Texas legislature. And the Texas legislature has been doing what it usually does. Fill in your own blank there. John is here tonight to explain all of what's been going on, every single thing that's been going on at the Texas legislature. And that's your introduction.
Every single thing.
That's what you.
Well, I have some property, oceanfront in Oklahoma, I'd like to sell you.
Absolutely.
So thanks for joining us tonight. Try to give you a quick rundown on what's happening at the legislature. Been quite a few things going on. We're at day 105. Nobody's counting, though. There are only, however, 35 days left. The members have just come off of a holiday weekend, and the pace picks up from this point on. Safety is currently tracking 225 bills that may have an impact on your operations or the operations of your service providers. But deadlines in the House and Senate are starting to have an impact on legislation moving forward or not. So let's talk about where we are as we move forward. Remember, May 6th, we've been through some of these dates before, but May 6th is the last day for House committees to report House bills and joint resolutions to one of the calendars committees. That means they have to have already heard the bill before they report it. So there's about actually May the 2nd is probably the last day that we could have any actual committee hearings. Thursday, May 9th is the last day for the House to consider second readings of House bills and House joint resolutions. Now remember, second reading occurs after a bill has been reported from committee and it's calendared for floor debate. That first time it comes back from committee back to the floor is the second reading of the House. Actually second reading occurs in the Senate as well. The House calendar consists of either a general calendar or a local calendar. Bills as they come out of committee get routed either way. There are different rules for how they take up each of those calendars. The Senate has a similar process, Senate intent calendar and the local and uncontested calendar. But deadlines are starting to come into play. Friday, May 10th is the last day for the House to consider third reading for House bills and joint resolutions on the daily calendar. That doesn't apply to local bills. Their deadline is on the 17th, a week later. But for general calendar bills, the 10th of May is the deadline for those bills to be considered on third reading, which means they have to have already been on the floor of the House once and be coming back for a third and final reading in the House. Once those dates pass, the House really begins, and actually the committees have already begun to deal with Senate bills that have come over, but the House committees are processing Senate bills, running them through hearings, but the last day for the House to have House committees to report Senate bills is May 18th. You'll notice that's a Saturday, so that's the first deadline we have coming up on a weekend. And then on May 21st is the last day for the House to actually consider those Senate bills on second reading. Those bills come over from the Senate, they're read first time on the floor of the House, they go to committee, then they come back from committee for second reading. May 21st is the deadline for second reading of Senate bills and joint resolutions on the daily calendar, and then on the local and consent calendar, which is a little more rapid process, May 22nd. You'll notice those 2 days are right after each other. Session ends on May 27th. There are a few deadlines related to conference committees and reports and things like that after the 22nd, but before the 27th. But the 27th is sine die. Everything finishes by midnight the night before, and sine die is just really kind of a wrap-up, close-up for some paperwork down at the Capitol. The governor has until the 20th day following adjournment to veto or sign bills. That'd be June 16th. Anything that he doesn't sign goes into effect on the 91st day following adjournment on August 26th. Things that he does sign, if there's a provision in the bill that says it goes into effect sooner, we'll do so. Otherwise, excuse me, August 26th is when those bills will become effective. Let's roll quickly into the safety agenda and what we've been focused on and what the pending bills are. Excuse me. So remember, Our primary agenda was related to property tax reform, ensuring that we protect our ability to accomplish our mission and protect the lives and property of Texas voters. There are two competing visions of what property tax reform is in the state, as they have congealed from the House and the Senate. In the Senate, Senate Bill 2 by Betancourt, as passed and amended on the Senate floor after quite a bit of debate, emerged with a 3.5% rollback rate, as opposed to the 2.5 that was originally proposed. The Senate version of the bill requires an election for all entities that might qualify for an 8% rollback rate. Those entities are entities with less than $15 million in combined property and sales tax revenues. That election would have to occur in November of 2020.
So basically, combined tax revenues means ad valorem and sales. And if you're in terms of, so you have to have an election no matter what.
Under the current version of the Senate bill, as it passed and has been referred to House Ways and Means, yes, there is a required election in November of 2020 for that exemption to actually apply.
So regardless of, even if your ESD only takes in $15,000 a year in tax revenue,
correct,
you still have to have that election on, and I suppose they haven't specified the parameters of that election, whether it would be.
That election would be on uniform election date in November of 2020. So
a few other things on that election date as well. So.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So that bill may be heard as soon as Wednesday of this week in House Ways and Means. The House bill was sitting in the House calendar, kind of back and forth, kept getting postponed. The House's vision coming out of committee was a 2.5% rollback rate, which was consistent with what was originally proposed. I will say, however, the House version, the 2.5%, had some adjustments that resulted in probably a net rollback rate of 5%. Now, I didn't pay too much attention to that because under the House version, all emergency service districts retain the 8% rollback rate without an election. They automatically retain 8%. However, every entity that has proposes a property tax that exceeds the rollback rate, whether it's the adjusted 2.5% or the 8%, must have an election in order to exceed the rollback rate. That is consistent for both bills. And so I think if we're looking at tea leaves down the road, I would expect that that kind of exceeding the rollback rate is going to mean an election in that case. Right
now, what it is you can go over the 8% rate if you're an ESD, but you're going to end up you exposing yourself to possibly an election through a petition process of the voters.
No, the petition process is gone.
No, I mean right now.
Correct.
As it is right now. Some people may not quite remember, since they maybe have never exceeded the 8%. I just want to remind everybody, if you go over 8% of the rollback rate, you're subject to a possible election if the citizens do the petition process and then have that election. If under this current committee substitute for the House Bill 2, and both bills actually,
correct, that
would be automatic. You would have to have an election regardless if you went over that 8%.
Correct, you would.
Okay.
The other thing that's in the House version is it alters the definition of debt for purposes of your property tax debt rate. And essentially it makes only debt that has been voter approved. And for ESDs, what that really means is unless you've had an election to issue bonds, all of your obligations that you have in the form of lease purchase agreements, loans, any other kind of obligation is not considered debt and cannot be part of your debt tax rate. It all gets moved over into your operations and maintenance rate. Now the bill's impact doesn't occur until January 1 of 2020. So for the current tax cycle in 2019, you would be operating under the same rules we have currently in place, petition for rollback, debt versus property tax. If House Bill 2 passes with this in place, you're going to need to work with your tax assessor collector and your appraisal district folks to make sure that you shift everything in the appropriate categories this year and not next. Because when you make that shift, inevitably it causes your tax rate to exceed your rollback rate. And if you wait to do that until 2020, you're having an election if these bills pass.
If you've been keeping your non-voter approved debt, whatever that may be, in your interest rate, your debt rate, whatever you want to call it, INS rate, you are going to have to move that back over under the law. If you wait to do that in 2020, it's going to be real bad because
you're going to exceed your
rollback rate. You're
going
to exceed automatically no matter what, theoretically.
Correct,
so.
Assuming the bills pass. Now, there is still very strong effort out there in opposition to House Bill 2 and Senate Bill 2 by other local governments in the state. And there are more than 180 pre-filed amendments being drafted now, based on some of my sources' information, for House Bill 2 once it hits the floor. I would anticipate those same amendments would also be offered if Senate Bill 2 makes it to the floor, and I'm not sure which version will get there first.
Or what Senate bill could look like coming out of, because can the Senate Bill 2, it's going to Ways and Means, can it be altered by the committee?
Yes.
Can there be a committee substitute coming out of Ways and Means of the Senate bill?
There are negotiations happening now. The Senate Bill 2 could be amended in committee to just look like House Bill 2.
Okay.
And so we're just waiting to see how all that plays out.
I don't know. Am I jumping the gun if I say what happens should those be passed? Is that your next slide?
If what?
So Senate bill passed, right? The Senate,
right?
SB 2,
right?
With the 3.5%.
If it's amended by the House, then they go to conference committee. I think the conference committee process is going to be interesting this time around. There has been a conference committee on the budget already appointed. The challenge for that is the conferees from the Senate are all Republicans. It's one of the very first times that a single party has dominated a conference committee like that. And Lieutenant Governor made that choice a week or so ago. The budget conference committees are trying to get set up and run and working. But I think the property tax reform, if we have a conference committee on HB2 and SB2, could look very similar, very partisan.
Okay.
So let's move on a little bit from property tax, which has dominated much of the discussion at the legislature, to our other issue, which was sales tax. And honestly, our goal was to protect our access to sales tax. There's not been really any legislation filed that would impact an ESD's ability to have sales tax or to limit our sales tax authority. Now, there's not been anything filed to expand it, but right now we're kind of in a holding pattern. However, we are tracking sales tax bills so that we keep an eye on language that may or may not be added. The third item on our agenda was to propose and support legislation for mobile integrated health care or community paramedicine. Representative James White authored House Bill 3307, which we talked about last time. That bill has been in committee. It has had a hearing. The testimony was all positive regarding the bill, and I expect a committee vote to occur tomorrow for that bill to be voted out of committee, and then it be reported later in the week. So it will be ahead of all these deadlines we're talking about and headed to the floor of the House. Now, our next agenda item was related to clarifying an ESD's exclusive ability to designate service providers. That bill that idea manifested itself in the form of House Bill 4350 by Representative Dwayne Bohack. Representative Bohack filed that bill. It was heard in committee. It clarifies that ESDs need to be engaged with emergency communications districts in who is dispatched. And in fact, if an ESD is the service provider in that area, the emergency communication district has to get the ESD's consent before dispatching a private entity. That bill was reported from committee last week to the General Calendars Committee. I expect it'll be set on the floor of the House in the next week or so. So, push the button twice. A little further down our agenda was to support and simplify reporting requirements for ESDs to state agencies. There have been several bills filed to try and expand or affect the reporting requirements. Nothing really to reduce the number of reports that are required to be filed, but we continue to watch and wait for opportunities on how to do that. There are some bills that I'll talk about a little bit later related to notice and open government things that will be interesting as it relates to this. But there just haven't really been any other efforts to consolidate some of that reporting that governments have to do to the state.
One of the issues, of course, being that one of the entities ESDs have to report to every January is the Texas Division of Emergency Management, and I was just reading the bill that transfers it over to A&M, so we're not sure exactly what that's all going to look like right now.
Yet.
So yeah.
Remember, there are 2 reports that are required for some entities to file with the the comptroller. Interestingly enough, the comptroller's been sending letters out to a bunch of entities that may have filed a report last year, but they don't have to file a report this year, basically saying, hey, you're in violation because you haven't filed a report this year. The comptroller doesn't really have authority to require you to file a report if you're not within the parameters of the legislation. Interestingly, however, on their report form, they have a box to check that says we don't have to file this report. Strange mechanism over at the comptroller. Let's move to the next legislative agenda item. One of the things we were going to work with the State Firemen's and Fire Marshals Association to increase funding for TIFMAS and disaster response. That funding is part of the budget bill, Senate Bill 1 and House Bill 1, which is in conference committee, in Article 3 under the Texas A&M system, the Texas Forest Service. The TIFMAS funding is remaining the same. There was an effort to make an amendment to raise that funding, but that funding did not increase. However, I'll go to the next agenda item that we had, which was to support efforts to fully distribute the money that's in the Rural Fire Department Assistance Fund account so that it can be accessed. There was a rider filed by Representative Drew Springer to allocate and that remaining funding. It's about $23 million. That rider has been attached into the budget, and so the full $23 million is in the budget for that Rural Fire Department Assistance Fund. The other things that we've had are just to monitor efforts on a statewide agency. I felt like this was a good point to say, hey, there's no statewide agency being created, but the Texas Division of Emergency Management, as you spoiled my report,
sorry,
is being proposed to being moved to the Texas A&M system. Of course, the former director of the Division of Emergency Management, Nim Kidd, had already moved over to the A&M system as part of that disaster recovery and reporting group. And so this bill, House Bill 2794, has already passed the House. It's in the Senate now. There was a Senate companion, but it's just been sitting in committee waiting. I expect 2794 to move in the Senate, and for TDM, absent some hiccup in the works, to actually move over to the Texas A&M system, which will be nice for us because we've got a good relationship with the A&M system through VG Young and some others. There's a lot of training that occurs there. I think that's really the impetus. The Forest Service is there, should kind of bring everything or some important things together under one umbrella. Now, there's a long list of other bills. Remember, I told you we have 225 other bills that we're tracking. I've kind of picked a few highlights. Some of these are from our high priority list. Some of them are just interesting bills for us to pay attention to. There is House Bill 1843 by Ed Thompson that requires an ESD to get consent from a city before annexing territory in that city's ETJ or city limits. Several sessions ago, we had this issue come up in Parker County and Fort Worth. This is actually being driven out of Pearland. And that bill has been reported from the committee in the House. It came out of Land and Resource Management. It's now going to head to calendars where it may or may not be set for the floor. That bill is interesting, and we had talked in the past with the cities about this concept, and certainly the bill was generated as a result of a city not being happy about folks within their ETJ petitioning to be in that ESD because city wanted to annex the area.
Right.
When in fact the city's kind of enticement was, hey, we'll give you fire and ambulance service, and the folks in the area said, no, we don't want that. And with the annexation reform, the city couldn't force that annexation. So the folks in the community said, well, fine, we don't need your service. We're going to go get it from the ESD.
Right. So basically what that bill does, if I'm understanding correctly, is take the municipal consent language out of the petition process. I mean, it doesn't take it out, but it copies it over and just copies it down into
annexation.
the annexation process, which is later in 775. It just says this is how you annex territory to your ESD. You have to go through all these steps, plus all the municipal consent language.
Correct.
I guess the argument there is the city can still annex an ESD into the ESD, correct?
Provided if it complies with the Senate Bill 6 annexation requirements.
Right. And I guess the city would be upset. The reason this bill is coming about is because they want to annex into that area, and they don't. I'm trying to find out what the ESD changes. Being in that area changes for the city.
Well, it doesn't. It's a service that the city provides to its folks within its city limits.
Right.
That it was hoping to entice that community to want to have by being annexed into the city, because they can't unilaterally annex the area.
That's right. Okay.
And so the folks said, no, we have a choice. We're going to go ask the ESD to annex. And we testified in committee that it was basically undermining the Senate Bill 6 annexation reform. Mm-hmm. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with the bill. Next one is a compensation for ESDs when a city annexes. This really kind of adjusts, particularly for ESDs that have large amounts of sales tax or an area where sales tax is annexed by the city. It adjusts the compensation to account for that. Senate Bill 1083 has been recommended for the uncontested and local calendar in the Senate. I expect it to come over to the House within the next week. Now, the third one on this list is rather interesting. This is actually a modification of the Tier 2 annexation issues. It adjusts some petition requirements, so it makes it easier to petition not to be annexed. So it's an interesting adjustment. The fourth one, however, is essentially would apply House Bill 6 to every city in the state. That bill, House Bill 347, has passed the House and is in the Senate now. The Senate companion was sitting there waiting in committee, so I kind of expect that one to move as well. House Bill 347 was filed by Representative Phil King. Those are the highlights on annexation bills that I wanted to point out. We have a couple of bills related to what I consider ESD Commissioner Choices. One is there was a bill filed by Representative Leo Pacheco to require election of Bexar County ESD commissioners. It's been referred to committee, but there's been no hearing set, and if you recall the deadlines, if there's not a hearing this week on a bill, it's not going anywhere because it just hasn't moved. There's also a bill pending in a Senate committee, Senate Bill 1579, which would allow separation of services. It's essentially the overlapping district creation process initiated by the ESD itself, where the Board of Commissioners for the ESD can say, hey, we want to separate into two districts and separate our services. And so that bill has been heard in committee. It's pending. It would have to move quickly if it's going to move anywhere. I'm not sure whether it actually has the momentum. I think this has been kind of an education year on that bill, but we'll see.
So basically that lets an ESD create an overlapping ESD without going through the
without having to go through the county
for
the
creation process.
Right. The focus of that bill is really Harris County,
okay,
which doesn't want to be engaged in its ESD stuff, and this allows the ESD to kind of take care of that.
Is there a chance
itself.
that gets bracketed down? I mean, I guess there's a chance.
It is.
But
remember, the overlapping district bill actually doesn't apply in Harris County.
That's true.
And so this opens that possibility up for Harris County.
Understandable.
So then let's talk about some of the employee and volunteer bills that are out there. Interestingly, there was a property tax exemption bill for first responders that's been left pending in committee. And once again, remember, we have those deadlines for reporting coming up if the bills don't move. There was a higher education fee waiver bill for disabled first responders and their spouses. That bill has passed the House and is now in the Senate. It's House Bill 766, which anytime you can move from one house to the other, the odds of your passage go up. There is a jury duty exemption bill for first responders, House Bill 354, that's been reported from its House committee. So it's going to move to either local or general calendar. And then there is a bill trying to maintain the confidentiality of employee information for first responders, House Bill 2446. That's been reported from committee. I expect it to get to the floor of the House and then move over to the Senate. There was a collective bargaining bill that's out that proposes to adjust how you compare costs for personnel and that kind of stuff, and arbitration and a variety of other things. It's set for hearing in the House committee for this coming week. It's been left pending in the Senate committee. I don't know whether there's enough time for it to move or what the politics of that are right now, but that bill is still out there and one to watch. From the EMS side, we have a couple of telemedicine bills that have been reported from committee. One, the Senate version has already moved over to the House. So I think there's this movement to kind of recognize that telemedicine is an effective way to deliver services out to the citizens of the state, particularly in the rural areas. There's also a bill dealing with licensing and certification requirements for EMS providers. That bill has moved out of the House into the Senate. It relates to some making sure that your first responders are getting whatever immunizations and those kind of things that they need when they're renewing or initially getting certified. There was a lot of talk at the beginning of the session about trauma funding and the driver responsibility program fees and how those were going to be dealt with. House Bill 2048 has been reported from committee in the House, and that bill is going to potentially affect the driver responsibility program and those fees. So we'll just kind of keep an eye on that. Those fees end up funding trauma throughout the state. There are a number of open government bills that we're having to watch as well. One that's somewhat helpful, and as a result of the natural disasters that have occurred, emergency meetings. Remember, we talk about emergency meetings during conference quite a bit. It's a 2-hour notice requirement. Well, this bill proposes to reduce that to 1 hour so that you can meet more rapidly. Senate Bill 494 has now into the House, so it's just going to have to move through the process in order to pass. There is a bill, House Bill 305, that's already passed the House. Would require that you post a number of items, including your agendas and minutes, on your internet website, but only if you already had a website in place on January 1st of 2019.
Who's the author of that bill? Do you remember?
The author of that bill is...
It's not White.
It is not James White, and I don't have the author of that bill handy. I can look it up, though.
I thought Representative White had a similar bill in previous sessions. So
no, this is not his bill.
It's not that big of a deal. You
Okay.
don't have to.
Well, I can have it pretty quick.
Okay.
There is also a bill prohibiting the use of public funds to advocate for or against legislation. I think this is directly a result of the property tax debate reform, where all of the local governments have been sending their representatives because most of them are volunteers and they don't have the time and ability to come down to Austin to advocate, and so they need representatives to do that. This bill has passed the Senate Bill 29. There is a House version, House Bill 281, but Senate Bill 29 is in the House now, headed to the same committee that House Bill 281 was in. So that bill has been, I think it's manifesting the same property tax reform debate that's going on, but certainly it would impact the ability of local government to participate in the legislative process.
Including ESDs.
Including ESDs. I mean, it would essentially require ESD commissioners or ESD employees to come to Austin and be on top of all of this, because it would prohibit spending any money with an organization or with a lobbyist or somebody to advocate for you at the Capitol to monitor legislation. There is finally the last one I had on kind of the open government list, Senator Betancourt. This is a refile from last session, but he's actually passed out of the Senate, Senate Bill 1303, which would require cities to post on the internet where their ETJ and city limits are. Many cities do that, but not all of them, and so sometimes it's difficult to figure out where those jurisdictional boundaries are. This bill is now in the House, and so will be interesting to see. A couple of miscellaneous items. There is a local option property tax exemption for volunteer first responders. That bill is set for hearing in the House on Wednesday. It's running up against the clock. What that would mean is that local governments would have the option to offer a tax exemption up to a certain level for their volunteer first responders. And then the next one is employment protection, essentially, for volunteer first responders, basically would saying, hey, as an employer in the state of Texas, you can't terminate someone just because they're serving as a volunteer first responder. That's House Bill 2348, and it is set on the floor of the House tomorrow. So it should move over to the Senate.
That 2456, that's one that I think came out of this particular ESD was working with a member, I think.
And that bill is actually, with the hearing set, like I said, it's a little late in the process because it's got to really be reported out by maybe Friday of this week, early next week. But it's at least moving. There are a number of bills out there that just aren't even moving, aren't even getting hearings set. So that's my list of bills. You'll be able to get to legislative reports from the safety website. We'll keep updating, we'll keep tracking things, and keep you posted. Hopefully we've got some questions from folks.
I want to go ahead and reiterate, thank you, John,
Sure.
for that presentation, that update. I want to go ahead and reiterate how you can get in touch with me. You can, us. You can call 512-251-8101 with a question. You can fax your questions into 512-251-8152. It actually comes in the form of a PDF to an email address, but that's modern technology for you. Email us at safed, S-A-F-E-D, no hyphen there, S-A-F-E-D at texas.net, and Texas is spelled out. And you can text me right here, 512-567-0857. Normal text messaging rates may apply. Again, please don't text message me or don't call that phone. I have been getting some texts from folks about some technical issues. Hopefully you're not still staring at a frozen screen now. I hope it's been smoothed out now. But if that does happen again, please hit refresh on your screen. I have had a couple folks tell me that that's happened. So please just hit refresh, and hopefully it'll catch up. And there will be a recording of this webcast available at no charge, of course, on our safety website at some point in the very near future. Anyway, so as far as questions, I think we're in a weird time right now because it's sort of, there's a lot coming and there's a lot that's very indefinite. There's a lot that could happen and there's a lot of unknown right now. What is the thing that your ESD commissioner, somebody watching this right now, needs to be looking at in terms of engagement? Is there something they can do right now?
So with respect to the big issue, property tax reform right now, the ESDs are in a fairly narrow lane on that. We've been accommodated in both bills to some degree, and I think contact with your member helpful would be, hey, we really appreciate the efforts to take care of us as first responders and to preserve our ability to have access to money. We want to ensure that we continue to have those protections if something passes. That's really the key for us, is we are first responders. Don't hamper our ability to provide service. So the second thing is with respect to some of these problematic bills, I think it's always interesting to enter the debate about whether you should spend public money on someone to advocate for you, and the answer to that, in my mind, is the legislature. A lot happens. I mean, things move day to day, and towards the end of the session, they move hour to hour. And to effectively participate, you either need eyes and ears on the ground to tell you what's going on so you can participate, or you have to be here. And so I understand the frustration of some of the members on the actions of political subdivisions who have got organizations and associations to advocate for their cause. But that's why groups get together to talk about, here are our issues, here's what we want to do. So I think there's an opportunity still for some meaningful input in that process. Help us continue to be able to educate you about what we need, instead of taking us away from our jobs that we get paid for, instead of forcing us to come spend that time directly. that's another place where you can help. And then finally, I think it's a matter of just monitoring what's happening. If there's a bill that's of interest to you that you've seen in the list and you have questions about it, you don't have to just ask during this, frankly, webinar. If contact the association at any time, and we're happy to continue to answer questions and provide information and serve as a resource. So stay engaged. There's ways to get access to information on the Capitol. If you want to go find and read one of these bills we've talked about tonight, the Capitol has a website where you can go track that information yourself. I believe it's www.capitol.state.tx.us. It might be .texas.gov now, but there's a way for you to track that and stay involved.
Right. I want to get back to SB2 and HB2 in just a second, but I do want to say something about SB 29, which is the no lobbying from local government associations bill. Has a companion in the House that has, well, I mean, it's clear, it's in the calendars committee, right?
Well, it's been reported from committee.
Right.
So it's in calendars. It has not been moved out of calendars. It's not been set for the floor. So I don't know necessarily what's going to happen with that at this point.
That's a tough one because it's a tough thing, like you alluded to. It's a tough thing to argue. Lobbying, no offense, kind of has a bad name.
Certainly.
In terms of not a bad name, but you know what I mean. Like there's a connotation to that, and people say, well, tax dollars shouldn't be used for lobbying. Well, it's not like we're lobbying for bad interests here. We're trying to look out for the interests of ESDs across the state, because ESDs are affected by the laws that the legislature create in Austin, and we need someone, because like you said, the ESD commissioners themselves don't have time to track it all and come down to Austin regularly and be involved in the process. So, I mean, yes, you, John Carlton, are a lobbyist, but you're really serving a lot of times more of an informational and educational purpose down there to the members about stuff. So I think it's important that we get that message out. Should those bills start advancing, there may be a call from us. And it's not purely driven by self-interest of the association that, hey, we want to be able to keep lobbying. It's just, it's such a vital function of being able to protect ESDs and being able to advocate for ESDs and inform these legislative members who aren't always up to date on ESDs. Some of them don't even have ESDs in their district.
Some do not.
So I think, and this affects not just SafeD and its ability to advocate, but also any TML, any county organization, any local government organization. It does seem like it may be in response to the local government organizations voicing their displeasure on the property tax reform. So I think that's something you may hear more about. And so the association is publicly to you about that issue. Again, as John said, there's still a ways to go on that.
Yeah, and we'll keep educating. Hopefully everybody read the blurb that went out about SB2 and what was happening with that bill, and we'll get similar things out about other legislation as we get closer to the end. But the last 35 days is always an interesting ride. It's clear that the Senate and the House are not on the same page with respect to property tax reform. They may or may not be on the same page with respect to school finance reform. And they may or may not be on the same page with respect to the budget. And those are the big three. And if those things slow down, the rest of all these deadlines and schedules and bills moving could all come to a grinding halt. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot that can happen over the next 35 days, and we'll be curious to see how it ends up, and we'll just try to be prepared to keep everybody informed and take advantage of the opportunities as they arise.
I want to get to when the president of the association sends you a question, you should probably make sure and get that
Let's just
asked.
skip that one.
Yeah, well, if SB2 passes as is, will this 19 tax rate ESDs was set, so this fall, I guess, or will that not be in effect until the 2020 tax rate? Because the process starts, September 30th is when you have to have your tax
Right.
rates.
It does not affect the current tax year, not currently. If SB2 were to pass, it would become effective for 2020.
Okay, so 2020 would be that first tax
Yes.
rate.
Now, that's always a possibility to change. There's been testimony in the committee hearings about, what entities would do if they knew tax reform was coming the following year. So it's always up in the air a little bit, but the effective date for the bill, and I'm just double checking, is in 2020.
Okay, I think we're going to probably wrap this up a little earlier.
It is January 1 of 2020, just so you know.
It is January 1, 2020. Okay.
So both bills have the same effective
Right,
date.
so
you really need to be paying attention to your tax process this coming year if either of the bills pass.
Safety Board member Paul Graff brings up an interesting point about the using public funds to lobbying. We're not really lobbying for just the ESDs. We're lobbying for our citizens who are calling 911 and depending on quality first response and emergency medical service and fire protection. So that's really who we're representing at the legislature.
It all comes down to a debate on what does local control mean.
Right.
Right, and that's really where all of this is really kind of swirling around that central issue is local control, and how do those decisions at the local level get made, and what are the parameters within which those choices can be made.
Okay, I'm checking to see if we have any other questions right now, but I think we're going to go ahead. I understand there has been some technical difficulties out there with some folks. We will have a recording available to get this taken care of. So we'll get you taken care of one way or the other, so don't worry about that. I want to encourage you to keep checking along with us. I want to encourage you to keep tracking on your own. And if you have any questions about a specific bill, please reach out to the association. Can we throw that slide up one more time to track and research legislation yourself? Maybe we can. I'll give you there it is under my down here. That is the website you go to.
Magical, absolutely magical.
To go to and follow bills online. You can set bill notification alerts that'll send in your email when bills move. They'll send you a little email saying, HB2 has passed the House or whatever. It's really helpful. And you can set, you can go through the safety tracking legislative report and set bills notifications. Keep on top of things yourself if you like. We'll be sending out more information as we see fit. We don't want to bog you down too much. We want to make sure and hit you with the really important when it's really important. But there's, as we get closer into May, it's going to start getting really important.